You spent 40 minutes picking that outfit this morning. Not because you wanted to look good, because you were terrified of being seen looking bad. Those are not the same thing. And that gap between wanting to look good and being afraid to look bad is not a small distinction. It is the entire difference between a life you're living and a life you're managing. Here's what you do. You walk into a room and you feel it immediately, a quiet but firm pressure, like a weight on your chest that nobody else can see. You scan the room, you calculate, you run the numbers in real time. Did they notice when I came in late? Did that joke land wrong? Is my voice too loud, too quiet? Is my face doing something weird right now? You replay the conversation you had 3 hours ago. You rewind to the exact way you phrased that one sentence. You wonder if they took it the wrong way. You decide they probably did. You go home, you think about it again. You lay in bed and you dissect it. And then this is the part nobody talks about. You overthink the overthinking. You become aware that you're spiraling, and somehow that awareness doesn't stop the spiral. It just adds another layer. You've been here before. The bad hair day where you were convinced everyone could see it. The stumble on the stairs when you were certain every eye in the building tracked your fall. The time you said something in a meeting and immediately felt the floor drop beneath you. The email you reread 6 times after sending because surely something in there was wrong. This is the texture of your social life. And it doesn't feel like a bias. It feels like accuracy. Here's what the science says, and what nobody tells you plainly enough. Nobody is watching you that closely. Not because you're unimportant, but because they are too busy watching themselves. In 2000, psychologists Thomas Gilovich, Victoria Husted-Medvec, and Kenneth Savitsky published a paper in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology that named what you've been living. They called it the spotlight effect, the consistent, measurable tendency to overestimate how much other people notice your appearance, your mistakes, and your behavior. Here's the experiment. They had participants wear an embarrassing T-shirt with Barry Manilow's face printed on the front, a musician deeply uncool among college students. The participants wore the shirt into a room full of people, stayed briefly, then left. They were then asked, what percentage of people in that room noticed the shirt? The participants predicted around half. The actual number, 23%. Less than half of what they feared. But Gilovich and his team didn't stop there. They ran the same study with T-shirts of popular, admired figures, Bob Marley, Jerry Seinfeld. Participants thought they would be noticed more because now the shirt was something they were proud of. Same overestimation, same gap between perceived and actual attention. The spotlight effect isn't just about embarrassment. It doesn't matter whether you think you look terrible or whether you think you look impressive. In both cases, you consistently believe you are being observed more than you are. Your spotlight is imaginary, but you have been performing for it your whole life. To understand why this happens, you need to understand something about how your brain is built. You are the main character of your own consciousness. That is not ego, that is neurology. Your brain is a first-person narrator. Everything you experience from inside yourself. Your attention is anchored to you, your thoughts, your feelings, your mistakes, your face, your voice. It is impossible for you to experience the world from outside your own head. So naturally, automatically, without any deliberate choice, you assume others share your focal point. Daniel Kahneman in Thinking, Fast and Slow describes how the mind anchors to a reference point and then adjusts. The problem is the adjustment almost never goes far enough. You know intellectually that other people are not as focused on you as you are on yourself. You try to account for that. But the anchor, your own vivid, overwhelming self-awareness, is too strong. Your final estimate is still pulled dramatically toward it. This is why Gilovich's team found that even when participants tried to correct for overestimation, they still overestimated. The anchor wins, every time. And Matthew Lieberman in Social, Why Our Brains Are Wired to Connect, explains the deeper layer. The human brain has a dedicated neural network, the default mode network that activates when you are not doing anything in particular. What does it spend that idle time on? Social thinking. It replays interactions, predicts others' responses, rehearses how you come across. Your brain is not neutral. Its factory default is social self-monitoring. You are not anxious about being watched because something is wrong with you. You are anxious about being watched because your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. The problem is it's running that software on faulty data. And here's where it becomes a trap. Gilovich's team also studied what they called the illusion of transparency, a close cousin of the spotlight effect. In this case, participants were asked to lie to an interviewer. Afterward, they estimated how many observers watching the interview could tell they were lying. They guessed around 46% could detect the lie. The actual number, 25%. Almost half of what they feared. Your internal state, your anxiety, your awkwardness, your self-consciousness, feels enormous to you. It feels like it must be visible. But the gap between what you feel and what others perceive is consistently, reliably, almost shockingly wide. The blush you think everyone noticed, most didn't. The voice crack you were sure everyone heard, most weren't paying that kind of attention. The stumble, the pause, the half-formed sentence. You were the only one logging it. Most people never name this, so it just runs in the background. And the cost is enormous, not dramatic, not sudden, just slow and cumulative. You don't take the risk, because you've already rehearsed how bad it will look when you fail. You don't say the thing, because you've already imagined the reaction. You don't wear it, start it, try it, be it. You edit yourself before anyone asks you to. That creative project you've been sitting on for 8 months, you've already imagined the criticism. You've preloaded the negative reviews. The audience hasn't even seen it yet, and you've already been humiliated by it in your own mind. That opinion you had in the meeting, you kept it to yourself because you ran a quick simulation, what if it lands wrong? And the simulation scared you off. That version of yourself, the louder one, the stranger one, the more specific and more alive one, you've been keeping it in a back room because the spotlight felt too hot. But the spotlight was never on. Researchers extended Gilovich's work to athletic performance and daily variability. Athletes consistently overestimated how much their teammates and spectators noticed their off days. People believed their bad hair day was obvious to everyone around them. In study after study, the pattern holds. We massively overestimate how closely others are tracking our fluctuations. The research found something else worth sitting with. When observers were busy with their own task, playing a game, managing their own performance, the overestimation of being watched was highest. When observers had nothing to do but watch, the overestimation disappeared, because only then was the observer actually paying close attention. In other words, people only truly watch you when they have literally nothing else to occupy them. How often does that happen? Almost never. What you lost wasn't a social moment. What you lost was time. Actual, irretrievable units of your life spent managing the perception of an audience that was not paying attention. Philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote in his Pensées, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." He was pointing at restlessness, but there's a sharper reading here. The inability to sit with yourself, without performing, without checking, without broadcasting, is the core wound the spotlight effect exploits. You cannot be still, because stillness feels like disappearing, and disappearing feels like not mattering. So you perform endlessly, exhaustingly. Here's the thing that's harder to say. The spotlight effect isn't really about vanity. It's about fear of non-existence. When you believe people are watching, you feel real, you feel legible, you feel like your presence registers in the world. When you realize they're not watching, there is a moment before relief sets in of something closer to grief. If no one is watching, do I matter? That is the question underneath all the performance, and it is the reason you keep performing even after you intellectually understand the bias. The spotlight effect isn't a mistake you make once. It's a meaning-making system. It tells you that your actions matter to others, that you are significant enough to be observed, that you leave a mark. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, "The gaze of others imprisons us." But what he also understood was that we invite the gaze. We need the gaze. To be seen is to be confirmed. The spotlight effect is the neurotic extreme of that completely human need. Irving Goffman wrote in The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life that all social interaction is performance, that humans are perpetually managing impressions for an imagined audience. What the spotlight effect makes devastating is the realization that the audience is mostly fictional. You are managing an impression for people who are too busy managing their own impression to notice yours. You are performing for an empty theater. You have spent enormous cognitive resources solving a problem that doesn't exist at the scale you believe. Not managing other people's perception, that would at least have an object. You've been managing the perception of your own imagination. Every hour spent rehearsing a conversation that never happened. Every decision filtered through a hypothetical audience. Every version of yourself that you suppressed to avoid a reaction that was never coming. You didn't fail to be yourself because you lacked courage. You failed because you were too busy being somebody else's idea of yourself, and that somebody else was a character you invented. The spotlight effect research is even more precise about this. Gilovich's group discussion study showed that participants overestimated how much others remembered both their best contributions and their worst ones. Not just the embarrassing moments, the impressive ones too. The spotlight is imaginary in both directions. The brilliant thing you said that you thought would stick in everyone's mind. They forgot it by the end of the meeting. The terrible thing you said that you're still replaying. They forgot that too. Psychologist Tara Brach calls this the trance of unworthiness, a persistent background hum of not enough, not impressive enough, not together enough, not worth looking at, and paradoxically, too visible when you fail, invisible when you succeed. The spotlight effect is the external expression of that trance. And here is what makes it particularly sharp. You have been optimizing for approval. But approval from a fictional audience doesn't satisfy a real hunger. You can spend a lifetime getting your performance right, hitting every mark, saying every correct thing, wearing the right things, and laughing at the right moments, and still feel profoundly unseen. Because you were never performing for anyone real. Kishimi and Koga, in The Courage to be Disliked, build their argument on the psychology of Alfred Adler, who believed that the root of almost all psychological suffering is the desperate need for approval from others. Adler's prescription wasn't confidence. It wasn't self-belief in the motivational sense. It was something more specific. He called it the separation of tasks. The idea is precise. Your task is to act according to your own values. What other people think of that action is their task. When you try to manage their task for them, when you pre-approve yourself before anyone else can disapprove of you, you are overstepping. You are taking on a burden that was never yours to carry. This is not permission to be careless. It is permission to be honest. The research supports a version of this too. Gilovich's habituation studies found that when participants were given time to get used to the embarrassing t-shirt, before entering the room, the overestimation dropped significantly. The subjective anchor weakened. They became less consumed by their own discomfort, and their predictions about other people's attention became closer to reality. Habituation to the thing you fear being judged for reduces the spotlight effect. You stop being the loudest thing in your own mind. And when you stop being that loud to yourself, you stop projecting that loudness onto everyone else's awareness. This isn't about confidence. Confidence is still performing, just with less fear. What actually works is something quieter. It's the moment you catch yourself running the calculation, how does this look, how will this land? And you ask a different question. What is actually true here? Not what is impressive, not what is safe, not what will pass without scrutiny. What is actually, honestly, specifically true for you in this moment? Specificity is the enemy of performance. You can perform a type, you can perform a version, but you cannot perform a precise, unrepeatable, particular thing. The moment you stop trying to be legible to everyone and start trying to be accurate to yourself, the imaginary audience loses its power. Not completely, not immediately, but enough. Poet Mary Oliver asked, in one of the most quietly devastating lines ever written. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? The question isn't rhetorical. It is diagnostic. If your honest answer involves significant time spent managing the perception of people who are not watching, then you already know what needs to change. Here is the truth you carry out of this. You have been the most attentive audience to a performance no one asked for. You have been the harshest critic in a theater no one else entered. The spotlight you've been flinching from. You installed it. You aimed it. And you've been standing under it ever since, performing for empty seats, wondering why you're exhausted. The problem isn't that you care what people think. The problem is you gave them a level of attention they never gave you. And in that gap, between the watching you imagined and the watching that actually happened, you quietly traded your most honest, most alive version of yourself for something smoother, quieter, safer. Something that would survive a scrutiny that was never coming. There is a line from Marcus Aurelius, writing to himself in his private journal, Meditations, that has survived almost 2,000 years because it has never stopped being true. It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own. He wrote that alone, not for anyone to read, not to perform insight. Just because it was true. The spotlight effect is not new. The imaginary audience has always existed. You have always been its most devoted performer. But the data is clear. The studies are unambiguous. The audience is not watching at the level you believe. They never were. The spotlight was never on you. The real question, the one that should sit with you long after this ends, is this. Now that you know it's off, what will you finally do?